you also have at the same time, some political response here at home. We'll get to the Biden administration's response, which was actually very interesting and seemed to signal that they may be shifting more to the tactics that we've been advocating for from the beginning. But you had Congressman Ro Khanna coming out really strong with some comments about just what he thought of the Saudis and what they're doing here and how we should respond. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. He says in an interview with CNN, who do they think they are? Slams Saudi Arabia as a third-rate power and calls for the president to retaliate if OPEC slashes oil production, which of course they just did, by cutting off Saudi access to aviation parts, Raytheon and Boeing. Let me just read you a little bit more of what he says here. He says, it's outrageous. The Saudis need to be dealt with harshly. They are a third-rate power. We are the most powerful country in the world. I do not know why we kowtow to them. He called on the president to make it clear to the Saudis that the U.S. will cut off the kingdom's aviation part supply and prevent Raytheon and Boeing from selling to them. Quote, they are not our allies. They are hurting the American people, and we need to be tough with them. The president needs to make it clear we will cut off their supply. We could ground their Air Force in a day.
True.
At the same time, Senator Chris Murphy also is calling for, who has long been a critic also of Saudi and our relationship with them. He is calling for a wholesale rethink of our relationship. Let's take a listen.
I think it is a mistake on their part. And I think it's time for a wholesale reevaluation of the U.S. alliance with Saudi Arabia. What's the point of looking the other way as the Saudis chop up journalists, repress political speech inside Saudi Arabia if, when the chips are down, the Saudis effectively choose the Russians instead of the United States?
I mean, to me, the thing that Ro Khanna said, which was so clear, is they are not our allies. Like, that is so clear. So what are we doing propping up their atrocities in Yemen and propping them up wholesale? Like, this is complete insanity at this point, and it should absolutely end. I think they're both absolutely correct.
Of course. I mean, I've been waiting a long time to hear a congressman say anything like that. And just to give people some clarity, the United States has promised Saudi Arabia over $100 billion of weapons over 5 years. Saudi Arabia purchases 25% of all arms produced in the United States. They are entirely reliant on us for military advisors, economically, at the management level. Look, I've said before, I lived in the Gulf. These people can't even run their own countries without us if we wanted to. So that gives us a tremendous amount of leverage if we want to use it. We just don't use it, I guess because we're too addicted to the money and, willing to get slapped around. As Chris Murphy said, even when the chips are down, they side with Russia. They're like, oh, we'll help Russia out. Absolutely. It helps at helping Russia, also helps their own pocketbooks. But the Saudis and the UAE, just so people know, have been making a killing off of Russia. Here's why. They buy Russian oil, they burn it for domestic capacity, and then they sell us all the oil they can pump out of their ground to us. So we pay a high price, and on the arbitrage, they're making an absolute killing. Apparently in Sharjah and some of the other ports in the UAE, they're taking the Russian oil, mixing it up, putting a fake label on it, and then they just sell it to the entire world market. Everybody's making a cut. The Russians getting money, the UAE's making money. Only people getting ripped off are the people in this country and in California paying $6.40 a gallon.
In Europe, by the way.
And, well, of course. Well. But I'm saying the average consumer in the West is getting ripped off when all of these guys are making an absolute killing. And it just bears the question of, like, what's the point of this alliance? It reminds me of what I was talking about in the Ukraine bloc. I'm like, what kind of country are you when you give somebody hundreds of millions of dollars and then they don't tell you what they're doing and they also put you in danger? And then, like Saudi, hundreds of billions of dollars,
right? And
then they don't go against you and publicly slap you on the world stage.
Suckers. I mean, that's what it ultimately is. And so the Biden administration did put out a response, and it has one paragraph in here that's noteworthy in particular that Jeff Stein picked up on. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So in the White House response, he said, says, key paragraph here in the statement suggests maybe U.S. interest in exploring NOPEC. I'll explain what that is in a minute. Or repealing sovereign immunity from antitrust legislation that protects OPEC producers who manipulate energy prices would be a huge response. So NOPEC is a bill that actually could open OPEC producers up to antitrust lawsuits. Right now, they're immune from that. So basically, that would sort of take the gloves off and allow us to sue OPEC producers directly. And that would be, that would be quite a shift in terms of response. Jeff Stein calls it a big response here. And let me actually pull up the paragraph because, it's sort of like coded diplomatic language that you have to read into in order to see what he's talking about. But what they say is, in light of today's action, the Biden administration will also consult with Congress on additional tools and authorities to reduce OPEC's control over energy prices. So what Jeff is reading into that, I think correctly, is sort of like holding out the threat of moving forward with this bill called NOPEC that would open them up to antitrust legislation. I think that to me, the response should be exactly what Ro Khanna says, like, okay, well then good luck with supporting your military. We're done. We're out of here. Enjoy that. We should move forward with NOPEC and, open them up to antitrust lawsuits. We also should do the deal with Iran and do the deal with Venezuela as well, which actually there's news on this morning.
Yeah, big news on that front. I totally agree. I mean, at the same time, Krystal, I'm not going to hold my breath. There's no way they're going to do this. I think that the Saudis have such a tremendous hold. The Biden administration, they talked a big game. They still went to Riyadh, and now they've been slapped in the face. Will they learn? History says probably not, and we'll just continue.
The last piece before we move on to news regarding to Venezuela is, the U.S. public would support them if they did decide to stop selling arms to Saudi Arabia. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. Now, this is from a fairly hawkish outfit, which I think actually is interesting. So when survey takers were asked if the U.S. should continue its sale of weapons to Saudi, more than 2/3 responded negatively. Although most Democratic and Republican respondents opposed the continuation of arms sales to Saudi Arabia, Democratic opposition is more pronounced. Nearly 3/4 of Democrats, so it was Biden's own party, opposed arms sales, 3/4 to Saudi Arabia. 38% somewhat disagree, 37% strongly disagree, roughly 28% of Republicans somewhat disagree, and roughly 34% strongly disagree. So you have bipartisan support among the population for this policy. This is a wholly mainstream view everywhere except, this little beltway circle that we live in right here.
Yeah, of course. I mean, anybody who's normal would hear what we just said about any of these countries who take U.S. money and then do whatever they want. Be like, well, why do we give them money?
What are we doing?
And instead, in Washington, they're like, no, but you don't understand. Like, what about Iran? And we're about to talk about Iran.
Yeah.
What about this? And, norms and all that. Most people aren't stupid. Like, they know whenever somebody's getting taken advantage of, and that's clearly exactly what's happening.
And meanwhile, Jackson, Mississippi doesn't have clean drinking water. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.